Did you know that we almost had an economic crisis this month, specifically happening on October 18th? That's when it would start. How do I know that date? Because Congress is fucking incompetent. And because, unfortunately, we have three branches of government: the incompetent branch, the imperial branch, and the partisan branch. Unfortunately, they are not the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. Unfortunately, they've done all their things wrong. I mean, seriously, Congress is less popular than cockroaches. That's pretty bad. Pretty bad. And I'm not even kidding. There are polling sites with it. It's completely incompetent. It can't pass an infrastructure bill for Biden or Trump. It can't pass universal health care, youth care once. Not once, but twice. Both the ACA and as its substantial part of the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, failed because its public option failed. It uses for-profit corporations to do what nonprofit organizations would be doing, and but because of moderates. Or the American Health Care Act, because thankfully we had one GOP senator to stop us from just removing all of that with no replacement. But unfortunately, he died. Sorry, John McCain. And we cannot pass legislation to uncorrupt itself. The Florida People Act, the Fair Representation Act, the Disclose Act, the Freedom to Vote Act, the American Anti-Corruption Act. Do you want me to continue? Because there's so freaking many out there. We can't pass climate legislation, American Clean Energy Act, among this reconciliation bill, which is supposed to provide free preschool. It's supposed to provide free child care. It's supposed to provide paid family leave, which we're one of the 4 countries that don't have it. One of the 4, literally, in the 196. None of them are Western countries. It's supposed to fix and expand the ACA. It's supposed to get us to 100% clean energy by 2035. It's supposed to partly provide a just transition for that. It's supposed to provide free community college. It's supposed to, I forget what. It's supposed to expand Medicare to include dental and hearing, and those other things that aren't included. It's supposed to do all of that and help seniors get care and so many other things. But we can't even pass a freaking annual budget to keep the government from shutting down. Oh my God. Why? Because why? We can't even pass a bill to keep the economy from crashing. Because this debt ceiling would cause, if they failed to pass it, which almost happened, they would cause the economy to crash, prices to skyrocket more than normal because we have inflation, due that we're leaving a pandemic. We have and we have low supply and large demand. Interest rates would go through the roof, and the government would have to lay off thousands of workers because if we didn't raise that. I'm going to criticize both parties here. I'm a political science student. I'm a climate activist, and I'm not here to argue between Republicans and Democrats. Because honestly, families don't care whether or not who provides them is able to provide them the jobs and the things they need to have to feed their families, whether it's Republican or Democrat. What they care about is whether they can have adequate policy that they can have jobs and they can feed their families. Adequate policy is nonpartisan. Compromising with moderates or just partisan bickering, neither of those are both partisan. There's a difference between bipartisanship and nonpartisanship. There's a difference. And just because you're bipartisan doesn't mean you're nonpartisan. Unfortunately, we have both parties are more interested in helping corporations and doing political theater on top of a stage and getting reelected than helping people. In the middle, the moderates, with Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, they're stop kidding that they're trying to be they're the good ones. They're not the good ones. They're just as bad as everybody else, just in a different way. They use bipartisan compromise as an excuse to make inadequate policy. They're the ones that said no public option to the ACA. They're the ones that are currently trying to take this bill that's currently and take all the taxes that they're putting on the wealthy and say no to them and say no, so they can also say no to and say that there's a problem with being able to have enough money to pay for this bill. So they can argue that it would increase the debt and then they couldn't provide all those services, which have popular support among both Republicans and Democrats. They're the ones that they're against having clean energy. They're the ones that are against having or making elections not so much influenced by corporations and yeah. They're the ones that are against getting rid of the filibuster, what blocks legislation. Legislation again and again and again. And it's not in the Constitution. In fact, it would probably be ruled unconstitutional. That's a Senate rule. It was actually an accident that it happened because they accidentally took out the policy or the rule that allows them to end debate. Nobody noticed it until the 1840s when in the Civil War they used it. And the person who done it was Aaron Burr. And if you know anything about the Founding Fathers, a little bit about the Founding Fathers, you probably know his name for being vice president, but moreover from shooting Alexander Hamilton. And the idea that these moderates are helping you, they're not helping you. They never change anything, and they don't give a shit. They want to help the corporations. I mean, Joe Manchin, just for example, his daughter is the CEO of the company that makes EpiPens. You think he was trying to write this pharmaceutical price reduction thing adequately to actually help you? He's just trying to pass a bill that looks like it would help you. Therefore, he gets credit for it. That's where he gets credit for it. Yay, you had to help. You're not the problem. And then it never does anything. That's what Manchin's trying to do. But adequate policy is nonpartisan. Policy like that is the problem. Personally, I'm independent. I trust neither party and no politician. Not Biden, nor Trump, not Bernie Sanders even. I hate all politicians. I'm registered Democrat because I'm more likely to get what policies I want from their side. But I'm more of a third way progressive. I dispense with both the left and right political spectrum. I live in rural central Pennsylvania, and I go to university in rural southwestern Pennsylvania, and I'm a member of a Sunrise Movement, a youth organization fighting for a Green New Deal. And no, that does not include banning cars. This summer, I walked with about 24 others over 100 miles from Harrisburg to Washington, D.C. to protest at the White House for a bigger climate package as part of the Sunrise Movement. With that same movement, I was back in 2020 election helping phone bank and text bank for Biden. Knowing full well, and knowing most people in the movement probably knowing full well, that come that summer, if I had the opportunity to do that, I would be doing it. And I did. And you probably might be wondering, why would you do that? Because I don't believe that Biden, I believe Biden Biden's just like the other politicians. He's also corrupt. He's also bought to a certain extent, but it's a competition because they buy you using your elections. Behind the scenes, these big think tanks, corporations, they both support Republicans and Democrats. behind the scenes, there is no political left or right. They're trying to do what happened in Bacon's Rebellion in 1676, 100 years before the American Revolution, when a disgruntled member of the or disgruntled person who opposed the current governor of Virginia in the colony of Virginia and wanted to become governor himself, decided to start a rebellion because he said that he said that the government of Virginia was not taking enough of the Native Americans' land. So he got together a bunch of white indentured servants and African American slaves, and they got them together. And at the time, slavery laws were they were much weaker than what we hear from history. Like a slave could sue their master in court, and they weren't necessarily based just on race. However, neither of these groups could vote and had any power in politics. But he took them. They killed several people. So killed a group of they killed a tribe of Native Americans, and then when the Virginia government still didn't respond, and then started to attack them, they burned Jamestown to the ground. Eventually, the man who started it, Nathaniel Bacon, died, and the main instigators of the rebellion were arrested and hanged. But afterwards, the government of Virginia passed laws making slavery based on race, and it also passed laws that basically made slaves have as much worth as a bread box. And started trying to make whites and blacks demonize each other. Similarly, today, corporations behind the scenes are trying to do the same thing. Politicians don't usually actually hate each other in person, and when they do, it's kind of weird. That's first off. They fight each other. Sometimes they do that for good reasons. Sometimes they do that for bad reasons. They fight because they think they want to see that. That way they can still get corporation support, but at the same time not really do anything, so they get corporation support from them funding PACs to back their campaigns. And not by rigging the election, but by influencing you, the voter. That's how they do that. They influence the advertising, they influence the media, but you have the ability to do research and find what the actual information is. And that's what you should do. We can fight back against this, but you have to be more involved. When I went to the protest in the summer, the reason why I knew I would jump at the chance of doing it, because I don't believe in elect it and forget it politics. I don't trust that when I elect politicians that they're going to do what I ask them to do. I know I have to push them and protest them and fight for them to get to do what they want, because that's the unfortunate reality that you could do their job better than they could. They can't. That's what I'm a realist with that. But trust me, and you think, yeah, and with this current thing, with the debt, and trust me, there's a way out of this perpetual state of agony. We've done it before. We have the Revolutionary War. We'd had the Civil War, the Progressive Era, New Deal, Civil Rights Movement, among others. I mean, our country was founded standing up to corrupt and tyrannical and incompetent regimes. You think you can't do it? We can't do it again? And let's start off with the debt ceiling. With the interest rates going up and prices probably going sky high, and then the government shutting down and laying off thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people. And several months ago, they had to pass the budget resolution to do this. or the budget resolution to get this reconciliation bill that I was talking about passed. Schumer is the majority leader of the Senate right now. He's the leader of the Democrats, and McConnell's the minority leader, the leader of the Republicans. McConnell is like Machiavelli himself. He's like Darth Palpatine. He's the real villain here, not Trump. Trump is mostly his stooge that got away from him. McConnell is the really bad one. McConnell has been signaling since August that he would oppose raising the debt ceiling. So it would look like that Democrats were spending out of control when really it had nothing really to do with that, because they planned to pay for all of the legislation for taxes on the wealthy, which is a good thing because I'll get there in a minute. But Schumer, for some reason, didn't think that McConnell was actually doing that. McConnell freaking said that. How many years have you known McConnell? And how many times have you opposed him? He calls himself the Grim Reaper of Democratic legislation. When a politician calls himself Grim Reaper in any sense, maybe they shouldn't be in office. But finally, now, McConnell completely going and said, McConnell has said that he should include in the reconciliation legislation, which he should have. He should have gone back and did that. But in a good way, because but they said that would take 4 weeks. And I'm like, how long? If you keep doing your recesses, like you're going to be able to do them anyways. Bo McConnell, thankfully, finally, for once in his freaking life, caved. And because he knew that doing this would hurt him too, eventually. And he didn't want to put too much pressure on Manchin to get rid of the filibuster. You know, the filibuster, that item, that procedural tool that prevents most things from getting passed and requires bipartisan compromise to get stuff done in a way that does not reflect the electorate properly. And it's just ridiculous. Like in Europe, in all the countries that have the top 10, or all countries that are top 10, most democratic countries, they use the parliamentary system, which is the U.S. isn't on there. It's like 24 or 42 or something like that place. But still democracy, though. But anyways, what was I saying? Oh, so, I forget. Oh, so they're based on the system of majority rule. The Founding Fathers created the U.S. system to be based on the system of majority rule, because the Articles of Confederation, which were not working, because they required a supermajority, were not working, and they needed majority rule. But Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, are dead set on making sure that filibuster's there, even if they block popular anti-corruption bills like the For the People Act, even if they block this bill or things like the debt ceiling, literally keeping our economy from crashing, or even if they block things like this reconciliation bill, which luckily is reconciliation, so they don't need that, and other and pretty much anything. The fossil fuel industry has given up on its workers, putting them out, and not paying them enough, not giving them the funds they're entitled to for black lung and other things, and sicknesses they can get from there. It's not doing that, and it's taking the money and running. High gas prices, constantly saying that it can go on forever when it can't. When the EIA, the International Energy Agency, which was founded by people that were in the fossil fuel industry, high up in the fossil fuel industry, says that we need to stop doing more fossil fuel projects by the end of this year, it continues to do so. They continue to do so. And Biden keeps allowing those permits. And so does Newsom, and so do all the others. That's because people aren't listening. People aren't looking around, and they're not watching. People need to watch and pay attention and say, no, this is wrong. We need to draw red lines ourselves as voters and pay attention. I mean, a couple months ago, they tried raising the minimum wage. people, Republicans even said that this needed to be done. And the economy says it too. That's why companies are paying each other, because people don't work for it anymore. You say that affordable wage was for teenagers to get a job. What the heck? As a teenager, when I was a teenager, does it really matter? Because I'm living with my parents. If someone that's out in work, they have to feed their families. And that's exactly what it was for. People feeding their families. Look back in history and stop making incorrect platitudes. If you say that if you say that the minimum wage, people should work up to that, well, you do realize that not a single place in this country you can afford a 1-bedroom apartment on minimum wage for a single person, or for a 3-person. Yeah, I think for a single person. If it's not, for its 4-person family, it's permanent. But you can't nowhere in this country. I think it's for a single person. Look it up. Anyways. But still, we have large number of economic equality, and you want to know why? Because wages are not increasing with inflation in the GDP. When the economy grows, our economy has been growing. It has. Well, except for COVID and, Great Recession and stuff. But it has been growing. Slowed down a bit now because of COVID concerns and the debt ceiling concerns and stuff like that, but it's been growing. However, if you'll never notice that growth, if your wages and benefits do not grow with it, and companies have been making more in revenue, making more in profit, that's how the economy is growing, but yet they are not paying their employees more to go along with it. This is also what caused the Great Depression. But you think the farmers and the people, factory workers, felt they were buying too much credit? No, it wasn't that. It was the upper middle class that was doing it. And they weren't paying it back because they weren't able to pay it back, because they thought that the people that were on the bottom would eventually get them, enough money would come from them eventually that they could pay it back. But they weren't. And then the economy collapsed because banks weren't able to get enough money, give money to pay people, and then the whole thing collapsed. First it was all that collapsed because of that. That's what happened in the Great Depression. It's a demand problem, not a supply problem. The 80s was a supply problem. That's different. But now it's a demand problem again. The Great Recession was also a demand problem. Usually it's a demand problem. Supply problems are usually smaller and more specific. But anyways, so we've created a bunch of coping mechanisms as you just get past it. And we just created a bunch of coping mechanisms to get past these things. So to encourage corporations to get bigger. That way they pay more their employees more, even though it's a lower percentage. But that's running out now. And why wealth won't, and it's not even good for these rich people. Because according to the pyramid of happiness, according to the pyramid of happiness, money is not an odd thing. You need food and water and physical needs, and then you need mental needs, and then you need a self-fulfillment, which is experiences and having fun with friends and doing something with your life that's meaningful for others. That's what happiness is. Doing stuff like that is happiness. Trying to get more wealth when you already have, $200 billion like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, and then you're forced to stay relevant, or feel like you need to stay relevant. If you don't make more, you won't stay relevant. If you're lower, then you need to keep up with the Joneses. Everything seemed to move. Everybody seemed to get more wealthy, even though it was just you, and now you have to buy a bigger house because everybody else did. We need to stop doing that. That's not going to make you happy. There's a reason why they say that income and happiness stops around $75,000. Maybe it continues up a little bit, but really well-being doesn't. I mean, rich communities also have have rates of high mental illness, like poorer communities do, and rates of suicide, higher rates of suicides, higher rates of drug use, and that sort of thing. They just do a better job at hiding it. A really better job, because you can't, how can you ignore all the fancy golden stings? How can you afford the big giant mansions? And Joe Manchin's also in that. Like his houseboat. Like him doing his houseboat. And him being out on his houseboat. And people ask him for the help. People in West Virginia, people in West Virginia, people from West Virginia kayak up to him to ask him to support a bigger reconciliation bill, like the Progressive Caucus has been asking for. 3.5 trillion, or even 2 trillion for freaking, just not 1.5, because that's never going to be adequate. That's going to be partisan policy. Joe Manchin partisan policy. The party of Joe Manchin. Because it's not the Democratic policy, because Joe Biden was elected on a bigger policy. Because of people pushing it. He wouldn't have gone for that earlier. You know, it was 1.8 trillion to start with. But anyways, Joe Manchin says, just shouts platitudes saying, we'll help people in West Virginia. We're doing all we can, even though, you know, West Virginia is a weird state, and it's not necessarily true that people will say this bill too big. You say he says it causes debt, when no, you have it paid for by taxes on the wealthy. And you may wonder what happened with this. Oh, that's the Citizens United decision and the Buckley versus Bayo and getting rid of the U.S. FCC balance doctrine, which prohibited people from, or corporations and the wealthy, from just giving willy-nilly to campaigns for clarity. I'm just going to put it that way. It's a little more complicated than that. And from the media, from sidelining it like Fox News or MSNBC to a certain one way or another. The CNN is also liberal sidelined, but it's not progressive. It's not left sidelined. It's more, if you go into Britain, it would actually be center-right. If you're looking for a left sideline or left-wing spin, that would be MSNBC. However, there's a lot of things on the internet with that. Yeah, and Manchin doesn't want the public financing of campaigns where people pay for, where you are given a tax credit and you can send it to a certain candidate of your choice to fund their campaign. I mean, and if you don't, you can send it back. The point being, that would give you money, because obviously your income is probably not that disposable, that to allow you to give money to politicians that you support, instead of a corporation doing it for you, which will be definitely against your interests. The thing you have to understand about politicians is their only interest is getting reelected. They have, as some British YouTuber said, they have chronic fear of losing their job. And in the U.S., it's worse because we have elections every 2 years for House representatives for some reason. But anyways, they give you they not bribed into doing something like that. That's not how it works. Corporations give campaigns give money to PACs, which fund back a candidate with information, or the media backs them with information. And they sort of whisper in their ear saying, if you don't do this, I'll stop and I'll put attack ads for you, or I'll slant against you. So they give you the faulty information, but it's your choice and knowledge whether or not to accept it. And if you learn how to stop listening to all the fake news from both the establishment and just downright idiots that are not part of the establishment, that are just go against the establishment, do so much that it's like, what the heck? You're just fearful and pulling at straws and then making everybody else believe it, trying to convince yourself of something and now convince anybody else. That's what it's like. Or that's what you need to avoid. Then here are also some news sites. Reuters is a good one. Politico, it's more or less good, better than PBS is good because they're they're like funded. They're a nonprofit, but they're publicly funded, so they're not interested in um, making in views so much. Their information and getting out information. NPR is good with that. There are others too. Um, the Hill is one place I go for a lot of congressional news. Um, yeah, there are others. Can't think of them all at the moment. Axos. Usually their studies or sites like that. Axos is pretty simple and at the same time good at getting up. Gives really good, short but sweet, and gets everything you need to know to the point.